Thank you to Susana, Shmuel, and Luis. Why are you all sitting back there? There's plenty of space here. There's no institutions or, big guys. Well, big guys, you are all big guys, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of free spots here. Why are you so far? You need some warmth. I'll come closer. Okay, we're going to continue with the sustainability program as we are talking about scaling and growth. And all companies are unique, but at the end of the day, they all have the same challenges and risks. How managers or founders manage these challenges and risks is key for sustainable growth. Okay, so to moderate a conversation on this subject, we have with us an entrepreneurial manager and active seed investor with experience in growth, consumer, and fintech companies. He is Ian Marsh, principal at DNA Capital, and his guests are the CEO at WeTransfer, Gordon Willoughby, and the independent board member at BBVA, Sunir Kapoor. Let's welcome them all on stage. Welcome, guys. Here they are. Welcome.
Welcome. So I thought we'd do some intros before we get into the meat of the topics. So before I started my new life in venture capital, I actually ran quite a few startups, including most notably HelloFresh, which was a large e-commerce subscription delivery company. And we definitely scaled, but I'm not sure always how sustainable it was. So I'm looking forward to hearing these guys' inputs in terms of the key lessons, because they've kind of they've learned through the hard yards. So Gordon, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Gordon Willoughby, I'm CEO at WeTransfer. WeTransfer was founded back in 2009 and makes kind of beautifully obvious tools for creative minds. What's really interesting for those of you who started a business, it started with our founder, Bas Behrens, having a problem. And his problem is he had a marketing agency, and every time he wanted to send materials to his client, he needed to put it on a USB disk and get a motorbike. And he kind of waste of time, how can I? So he created this software for sending large digital files. And when his client said, great, can we have that for the whole company? He realized he'd got a business. So he solved one problem. The second problem was then how to make it sustainable. And he teamed up with a vlogger who'd created a digital billboard as an advert. And that was the advertising business. And so it started the business on a pretty sustainable footing. Awesome. We're now 6 products, 196 countries, 42 million monthly users.
Well, that's a lot of scaling.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm an independent director at BBVA, also part of their IT and cybersecurity committee that we started. I'm an operating partner at Atlantic Bridge, which is a transatlantic venture firm, typically has growth capital investments. We've been lucky enough to have some good exits. I'm also an entrepreneur. I've done 3 startups in the Valley, one very unsuccessful. One we took public on NASDAQ, and one we did a trade sale to a Fortune 500 company.
Awesome. So when I was thinking about this and scaling, I was thinking back to my own experiences, and we really only had one template at HelloFresh. It was go from 0 to 100 million revenue in 2-3 years in my country. And it was the pure aiming for the stars, unicorn, go big, go home, massive venture fueling, millions of pounds of marketing per month. But I'm not always sure that's the right strategy. I've seen several friends' companies have been through that and fallen by the wayside, and some have been turbocharged. So I think what's interesting to hear both from the operating side, is it feasible, but also from the sort of investor side, what should be the level of ambition? How do you think about what is the right level of scaling and the right level of ambition? Because there is a fetishization today of be a unicorn or don't bother.
So I can only answer it from the WeTransfer point of view. And WeTransfer has always aimed right from the start to be sustainable. It never wanted to follow what I'd call a very typical West Coast route of burning money, making big losses, getting in lots of investment, and hope everything goes right. From the start, they deliberately bootstrapped it, and we have stayed true to that as we've scaled the business. We've said we're not going to drive it into heavy losses, but we shouldn't. We have a business model which is cash flow positive, has a positive operating cycle. So unless there's one-off investments, it allows us to grow sustainably. I also think actually there's a real cultural difference. Our key investor is Highland Capital Partners Europe, And I think there's a real difference between European investors and US investors. And I think Highland, which in a sense tries to position themselves at mid-Atlantic, so to speak, is yes, go for growth, but not let's drive it into lots of losses because that increases the risk profile a lot. I also think losses narrow your flexibility. We had an opportunity this summer to buy a couple of products, a product called Paper and a product called Paste from a company called 53 in the US. And because we were profitable, we were able to buy it, not raise funds. It allowed us to move very, very fast. And that's been a fantastic part of our scaling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's not one size fits all, but you really have to take a hard look at how aggressive you're going and the loss profile you're building.
Right.
Because we all see it now in venture capital. We see a lot of companies that we meet, and it's working on very, very short runways can create a lot of stress and tension in the organization. It takes the founders also out of the business because they're just constantly on a fundraising mission.
Right, which is very distracting.
Yeah. And Sunir?
I think it comes down to why you start a business. Entrepreneurs start for different reasons. And it could be go big, go home, burn a lot of capital, do it the unicorn way. But a unicorn isn't the aspiration for every entrepreneur. It could be to build a lifestyle business, which can be very profitable. In Silicon Valley, there was a 200 million Series A round done, I think about 2 months ago, for a company which falls into that category. In Germany, for example, a number of entrepreneurs build great companies with very little capital. So a lot depends on your aspiration. You want to change the world, you want to go big, you want to become a unicorn, you want to reduce the number of acquirers, you want to become public, you want to have to deal with public uncertainty of your business. Do you want to make money? Do you want to make a mark on the world? There's just different reasons. And knowing what your real drive is will decide the cadence at which you take in capital, if you take in external capital, the advisors and others you associate yourself with, and you'll pivot during that journey. But understanding fundamentally what your aspiration is, and a unicorn should not be an aspiration. The aspiration should be change the world. It should be provide for your family or the people you want to employ and make a difference in your own environment. But understanding that and then dictates how much capital you raise, when you raise it, who you raise it from, the people you hire at different stages of the company.
And I think my feeling, Sunir, is actually finance for entrepreneurs like here has actually changed. It's now no longer one size fits all, go big, burn lots of money. I'm seeing lots of people who come back and go, actually we'd like a sustainable business. We may not get the 20x upside, but we won't get the crash and burn either. So I think finance in this area has become quite a lot more sophisticated, which gives entrepreneurs like here a lot more choice.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people coming into parts of Europe, especially Madrid, in Silicon Valley, who are not necessarily tech-savvy investors. So they will generally invest later in the growth cycle of the company. And as you know, when you start a startup, you're not really sure, the business model, will the dogs eat the proverbial dog food? When you need to really raise capital. There's a model in the Valley that started out around crossing the chasm. And it's around technology adoption. And some technologies get adopted virally, very quickly. You've got the early adopters who'll buy anything. Not that I'm saying your product isn't great, but and others will follow. And in between those early adopters and your mom or your others using the product, there's a chasm. And knowing if you're going after 16% of the market that's left off the chasm, which is the lull in technology adoption, where most of the market hasn't yet decided if what you're offering is for them, which is 70% of the market. So in the middle, knowing whether you're early or late dictates how much you're going to raise and who you're going to hire or grow within your existing team.
That makes sense. So I think now shifting to you've set your objectives, you come in. You guys have both taken over and come in as professional CEOs of businesses. I'm very intrigued, having been through that growth cycle myself. What are the key things when you've gone into the business that you've changed to make sure that it's set up sustainably for that growth?
Right, so unlike you two, I haven't been an entrepreneur. I've been, if anything, an intrapreneur in bigger companies like Amazon and eBay. So for me, coming in, there's really three things you focus on as you try to scale a business or take a business from more startup to scale up. The first, and I think when you're doing this, you spend the most time on, is people and organization. The second is really around product and process. And the third would be around technology. And for people takes up a lot more of your time. I think as you're scaling a business, it's now gone beyond when you can do everything yourself. Yep. You're now going to have to lead through your team, and you've got to spend a lot of time hiring the right people, bringing in the right talent. Hopefully, if you're at scaling, you've got product market fit, you can start to afford better talent. But spending a lot of time making sure the organization is in the right shape and you're bringing in the right talent is really important. And with that, there's a couple of things I took with me from Amazon to hear about hiring people. And the first is, you're not hiring for today. You're hiring for 2 to 3 years out. Yeah. And when you look at someone, if you're growing at 41% a year, you're doubling the business every 2 years. So is this person going to scale as fast as your business? You can't hire them for today's job. And the second thing was, Amazon had this great thing about raising the bar. And it was, don't hire anyone that isn't better than at least 50% of the people in the company at that level. So if you can't look and say this person's that much better.
And I think hiring people that are smarter than you, because I definitely saw sometimes in my organization people who would always hire a bit down because they felt it keeps them, protects their job, makes them feel confident, and you have to change that mindset. Okay. Hiring people better than you will make your job easier and will make you look better, and means your career will flourish.
Right, and your job as the leader in the business is to make sure that happens. It's your job to make sure that bar is held high, and your job, in a sense, not to feel the pain of not filling a role. That's not. The other thing is, the other side of that is, as you move from startup to scale up, is actually you're probably going to say goodbye to some people who were absolutely right for the early entrepreneurial phase, that high ambiguity, lots of latitude, and you're now in a business with more process and structure, and it's not right for everyone, and you shouldn't be afraid to have those conversations. Honor the pioneers that got you to where you are, but actually you need a different type of person sometimes.
And I think I found personally that was quite difficult to do, because you're growing so fast and there's so many day-to-day operational issues. You don't approach the longer-term ticking time bombs in your HR organization, because you're like, that person's still doing a job, I can't even think about replacing them at the moment. But actually, as the business scales, not everyone scales with the business.
Totally. That's it. And then finding people who can scale as fast as you're scaling is really tough. And some people just don't like a business, because when you're scaling, you're bringing in a bit more structure, a bit more process.
Yeah.
You need to focus people. Some people don't like that, and that's fine too.
Sunil?
The culture when you start a company in a startup is driven by the founder, right? The personality of the founder, everything the founder does, and CEO if the founder is also a CEO, and that doesn't change. And whether you're BBVA going through a digital transformation, or whether you're a startup going from product market fit, investing in the roadmap, hiring the first salespeople, engaging the first customers, there is a culture that either will reinforce the right behavior for that stage of company, or you have to, if you come in as a CEO, also find a way to adapt the culture as necessary. If you're going into a B2C type business model, or a B2B deep tech model where you have half a dozen customers versus hundreds of thousands of customers, whether you're customer driven, you're product driven, a lot of that you have to understand as a CEO. Recognizing the culture that brought the company to that point isn't bad. It may require some adaptation in priorities. A CEO does three things. They set a vision, which is believable. They hire a team which can, he believes, at that point in time, fulfill that vision. And you allocate resources, and then you get out of the way. And you enable them to succeed.
So this is all good theory, right? But in practice, you're growing. Have you guys got any examples where there's been something in your organization or company where growth was going into that, tipping over from that sustainable to unsustainable stage? The wheels were falling off. It was just getting a little bit too out of control, and you had to rein it back in order to make sure. Because I feel that in startup culture, there's a culture of let's break things, let's change things, let's iterate. and no, let's reward failure, and that's all great. But when you start growing your P&L, you have a responsibility for the business as usual, and you can't let that influence too much. So I'm just thinking, have you got any instances where, if you hadn't stepped in, hadn't done something, the business would have gone off the rails?
I would say the first startup I did, I've done big companies as well as startups, so I left Oracle and started a company in a regulatory space, so printing stamps over the internet, because I didn't like going to a post office.
Yeah.
Turns out you need regulatory approval to print money, which is what stamps effectively are. And I had no experience in the regulatory space. I did have corporate experience. I did understand technology and market fit. But you learn as you go. There was a founder slash CTO, and he had a very different style of doing things. If your chemistry with the person you're partnering with, a new CEO comes in, you're partnering with someone who most likely has a very different philosophy of how you should build a business. But if you both understand where you want to go, then how you navigate that path of getting there. When you raise the right capital, we raised $125 million from day zero, 3 years, 6 months, 4 days later to IPO. That's not a lot of money these days. But we raised it when we needed it, not raise it because you can, and therefore figure out how to invest. A lot of the startups that I've seen fail because they raise too much capital too early, and therefore feel, because the investors are pushing them, why aren't you spending it? Raising venture, putting it in your bank account doesn't help anybody.
So building on to this thing, I think the one area for me was very much making sure we built up and sustained our technical infrastructure. The stuff that's hidden, but actually makes everything work. And you're often under so much pressure is that a customer-facing feature? Why aren't our product engineers just doing stuff in customer-facing features? And I think as you scale up, the technology is unlikely the technology you put in place to start with, because you weren't exactly sure what product you were doing is the right technology. Yeah. You need to have a really supportive investor base, which says, yes, we understand you've got to invest to get the foundations, especially the technology foundations, robust and ready for the scale-up phase when you're going to be 4, 5, 6 times the size. And that's not as sexy as, we're launching another feature for our users. But in my view, absolutely vital, because it's on, everything is built on that.
I had a very similar issue. So obviously yours is real tech, and it's the actual tech stack, but at HelloFresh, we iterated very quickly the product we were selling. We were selling boxes of food, and we saw a lot of feedback in terms of recipes, portion size, packaging, and everything had an impact on the customer behavior and retention. But we got to a point where we scaled in our current warehouse, which is an outsourced warehouse. So far, it was a breaking point. Everything was breaking down, and we had to put a new warehouse in. And that warehouse project, end-to-end implementation, because it was moving 700-800 workers, we set up a whole new labor pool out of the local area. CapEx, 7 million of CapEx, refrigerating it all. That took 9 to 12 months. And having to repeatedly say to my consumer-facing growth team, no, to a whole range of initiatives. I want to launch the family box. I want to launch the discount box. Okay. I was like, we are not doing anything sexy at all for the next 6 to 9 months until we've moved from facility A to facility B, and we haven't fucked it up, basically.
Yeah.
And that is a hard thing for a lot of startups, I find, to take on, because it's constant iteration. I had so many people chomping at the bit saying, wait. It's not easy.
That's exactly it. You've got to say, wait. We put, I suspect, about half our development resources against getting our tech stack right. And it's now worthwhile. But
it's also something as a VC, we spend a lot of time with TechDD going, yes, you've scaled, but have you built something that can scale again? Because nothing worse than refactoring. When you invest in a company and they go, sorry, actually, we built the tech stack the wrong way, and next 12 months we can't do anything apart from just rebuild it, and by the way, it's going to cost you an extra $500,000 or something.
So that's actually a kind of a good criteria for, are you ready to scale the business?
Yeah.
Do you know broadly what your tech stack should look like, so this is what you need to invest in?
The next question I have is, you guys have both come from larger companies that are known for ruthless execution. Amazon most notably. what are the lessons that any of these guys or me running our company could take from, because it's pretty impressive what they've achieved. There must be some secret sauce that you can think that can be applicable to most people's sort of like young startups.
I'd never seek to give anyone else advice, but I can tell you what I brought across. I was very lucky when I arrived. It wasn't a burning bridge. The business was doing fine. And so I was given the time to ask and get answers to 3 questions. And my questions were always, as I went around the team, what absolutely must I keep? What absolutely must we change? And what do you need from me? And those questions really then enabled me to say, actually, there's some really good stuff I've learned at Amazon which I could bring in here. The hiring is a perfect example. There's concept at Amazon of raising the bar the whole time. And you actually have someone called a bar raiser in each interview circle who has no interest in whether that person gets hired or not, only is that person better in the business. So they don't feel the pain if they say, no, this person isn't better.
It's a bit the same in VC. We have one guy on our investment committee whose job is the bar raiser. Because
Right.
we all turn out excited, we want to invest in this company, and he's kind of phlegmatic and slightly greying, and he's seen it all before, and he just goes,
Nah.
it's good, but it's not good enough.
So I'd
Same thing
generalize
for
that to
HR.
say, when you've got those kind of important decisions, try and put someone in place who really doesn't have kind of skin in the game. Secondly, for me, it's all been about trying to build up our data and then getting very clear with people about what metrics we think are the most important metrics to move, and ideally, those being, sorry, it's a little jargony, input metrics, not output metrics, so not revenue, what affects revenue. Not build a customer base, what affects retention. So, you know, things that will lead to a much better outcome, but put a real focus and make sure, A, you're getting the right data, and B, you're getting people focused on the right
I like that
metrics.
point about the KPIs. There's too many companies you see are like, yeah, we're growing so fast, we'll figure that out later. I think if you have the right dashboard to look at as a founder or as a CEO, or actually with anyone in the company, you can make the right decisions. And that's very important to growth, because the moment you're not seeing the numbers and you haven't got that kind of transparency, it can go off the road very quickly if you're scaling aggressively.
Yeah, I think the metrics is extremely important. Different metrics, different stage of company.
Yeah.
You know, at BBVA today, take a very big company, we use NPS, Net Promoter Score, as a way, as one of the metrics with which to reward people. And so what are we rewarding? We're rewarding the customer experience and the likelihood that customers will recommend other customers. Right. And so different metrics, different stage of company. When you're an early technology, if you're on the left side of that chasm, new tech, new market, creating a market is expensive. And so your metrics at that point are getting customers. It's not so much about profitability. But once you believe you've crossed that chasm, if you're not profitable, you won't be able to invest in anything. You know, venture capital has a lot of strings and is good to get you to a certain stage. Beyond that, you have to fundamentally believe you can either build a profitable company or you're building a feature that is part of someone else's whole product and you'll exit. You can't delude yourself. So from Oracle, what I learned is very simple. Oracle's known for its sales culture, even though Larry is very focused on product. And the sales culture is all about measurement. And hey, you exceeded your quota 120%, you're going to get a bigger quota. And so that's the sort of culture that enabled Oracle to go through massive growth. At Microsoft, early days, early meaning 2 or 3 billion in revenue, so not so early, but it still felt and behaved like a startup. CEO was involved in all the key hires, which makes the people being hired incredibly empowered. Yep. CEO cares about my role. They've signed my offer letter. That counts for a lot. And even at 2 or 3 or 4 billion in revenue, the company was extremely agile. Right. And so that agility is not what you want to lose as you grow.
Very true. Guys, that's all we've got time for. I found that very interesting. I wish I'd had guys like you around to ask questions when I was building my company, because we're a bunch of late 20s guys trying to figure it out ourselves. But
you did a great job.
Yeah, well, but thank you ever so much. And it was a real pleasure. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.